I've gone through my fair bits of rejections, and one of my most popular LinkedIn posts actually was one of me where I put a very vulnerable picture of me crying. I missed like a promotion that I was like, thought I really deserved, and how I responded to that. I'm such a big proponent of like empowerment and like taking radical responsibility over your life and your career, right? And like having these principles that help you gain a bit of perspective when you deal with challenging times. It's kind of channeling our attention and our energy, which are two of our most important resources, to what we can control and actually extracting the lessons from that situation to help us move forward. Actually, a key ingredient of playing bigger is building that self-trust and letting go of the need to have complete certainty over a certain path or outcome. I can like choose a different response that does help me tap into my power rather than feeling powerless.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses, while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on the show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. My guest today is Cristina Espinal. She was born in Venezuela, lived in the US and Asia, made the UK her home, and joins me today from Madrid. After a successful first career, she decided to pivot and follow and trust her curiosity. She helps ambitious mid-career professionals gain the clarity and confidence to secure bigger, more aligned roles and turn their uniqueness into a side business. Her Play Big newsletter is a fascinating read. All links in the notes below. She has great passion for the work she does. She shares many inspiring stories. I learned a lot. I enjoyed this discussion very much, and I trust you will too. My dear friend Matt Zeigler had something to do with connecting us. Thank you, Matt. You are one of Talking Billions' patron saints, but you know it already. If you're not following Matt, you should look up his Cultish Creative blog, Just Press Record, and the Intentional Investor podcast. Both are phenomenal, and I'm not just saying that. I read, watch, and listen to all three. Please help me welcome Cristina Espinal. Hi, Cristina. How are you? So nice to see you.
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. We connected a while ago, and we had a nice chat a few months ago, and you knew you had an open invitation, and finally you decided to join me here, so I'm very grateful. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to jump right in, and you know the drill a little bit. And I've heard some stories, but I feel like I want to hear more. I'm very curious about the early days, and I know you have a lot to share. I'm curious about childhood and upbringing and how you think that time shaped you, shaped your curiosity, and maybe even the career path that you chose.
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, it's a great question because it was actually through the practice of reflecting on my childhood and my upbringing that I started to realize a lot of the stories and beliefs that I was telling myself. And at the end of the day, it's these stories, right? The lens through which we see the world. So I think it's really, really important to, for me at least, to have this practice of reflecting and really understanding why we are the way we are. So, gosh, where do we even begin? In terms of my upbringing, I was born in Venezuela, but I very quickly, at the age of 7, moved abroad to the US with my family. And don't worry, I'm not going to take you through play-by-play timeline, but essentially within a very short period of time, from the ages of 11 to 13, I ended up living in 3 different countries. So the US, Venezuela, and then Taiwan. And I think that definitely shaped me in terms of building my resilience and also my ability to connect with other people and just being able to make friends really quickly, right? Regardless of the environment. And I think another big element here, which I only realized again through this practice of reflection that really shaped my persona, was the fact that for around 6 to 7 years of my life, my dad worked abroad. So what this meant was that my mom really raised us alone, and in countries where, she didn't have the support network, the family. And I think as a kid, you're really perceptive. So I quickly learned that, okay, well, I don't want to add more stress to my mom's plate. And I kind of internalized this belief that like attention wasn't good. So I did really well in school, was a really good kid. I would even pack my brothers and sisters lunch for them despite being the youngest one. I kind of adopted this persona of like the responsible one. But again, all to say like how interesting it is to kind of reflect and observe like these roles that we take, right? In order to like feel accepted and loved by the people that matter to us most, which is our primary caretakers. And then in terms of the money aspect to it, so luckily, we always had enough money, but my mom was very good, and she still is with numbers, and she would give me a budget and allowance every month, which was like $20. So very early on, like I wasn't like the other kids where they could just go up to their parents and ask, hey, can I have some money to go to the cinema, to the arcade? No, like I had $20 and I really had to think wisely about where I wanted to spend that every month. So really the idea of like having to make trade-offs and think about what I value most was something I learned very early on. And that really helped me when I moved abroad to London to study my undergrad, because again, I had a very tight budget, but I never felt like I had to sacrifice things because I already had built that ability to, evaluate the trade-offs and think about money in a more conscious way. In terms of the way that my upbringing impacted my current career path. So, I mean, it's an interesting one because I can't necessarily there's some links for sure, but like to put things into context, I went to university to study politics at the London School of Economics. Like politics was like a big passion of mine. And I grew up without the luxury that many people have living in civilized countries of like not really caring about politics, because in Venezuela, we saw how the government, which is still in power, but not for long, really tore apart our families, right? It directly impacted us. So that kind of created this passion in me to want to enact some sort of change. But it was through studying it that I realized, actually, maybe this is not cut out. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, and I could make a change in other ways. And then it really came down to being more practical. And because I was in London and I wanted a visa sponsorship, I really had kind of two paths, consulting or banking. And I decided to go for consulting because it allowed me, to work with a much broader range of projects. And I thought it would give me a good foundation to build my career upon. So was there for a while, worked my way to manager. But along the way, I really craved autonomy, and I felt like my growth was really capped. So I went to the opposite extreme, and I actually started building a business with someone that I met on LinkedIn through a cold message that I sent. And we worked with Latin American creators to launch digital products. First launch, we made $30,000. Second launch, $45,000. We thought, okay, maybe we have something here. And long story short, that we ended up merging this company with a pre-seed fintech at the time, and they offered me a full-time role. So I kind of pivoted from consulting to startups. And then after 2 years in the startup, where I learned a lot in terms of hiring, firing people for the first time, setting up 3 different functions, there was that voice again kind of telling me, something's just not aligned here. And at this point, I kind of decided, I don't want to say on a whim, but I thought, okay, there's never a perfect time for anything. And I was having a lot of conversations with the people around me at the time who felt really stuck in their career, not really knowing what next step they should take. And I was helping them informally. And I thought, why not just make this, something formal? And I kind of went with that, put a program together, got my first client, second one, third one, and here we are, like 10 months later.
Really incredible. So growing up in multiple countries.
Yeah.
And changing, you moved to the US, and I know from our earlier conversation, you back to Venezuela, and then you moved on. I'm wondering, people ask me the same question, where's home? Because I was born in Poland, I went to schools around Europe, I made New York home, and now I'm living between Miami, and I spend quite a bit of time in the Caribbean. And people ask me, where's home? And I feel like I go to many places and I feel like I'm coming home. Where's home for you? How do you feel? I'm finding you now in Madrid, of all the places.
Yeah. I think that's a really fascinating question. And the methodical side of my brain is like, okay, what does home mean? But I think the less logical side of my brain, right? I think it's more of a feeling. And for me, I have multiple homes. So Taiwan, where my parents still live, is like still home for me because I spent 6 years there. I graduated from high school there. I studied Mandarin for a year. Like I absolutely love the people, the culture. So that's one home for me. Venezuela for me is also home because, that's where I'm from and I feel a strong affinity to. Not everybody feels that way when they move away from, the country they're born and emigrate to other countries. But because I always went back every summer and have a lot of friends and family there, it still feels very much like home to me. And then I would say the third home is London because it's actually the country where I've lived the most my whole life, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, I've spent the whole of my 20s there pretty much. And it's given me so many opportunities and I've met so many incredible people. So yeah, I would say that it's more of a feeling for me. And these 3 places have a very special place in my heart.
I like London. London is a wonderful city. I like stopping by. I want to bring up briefly politics. You said you studied it, and I studied politics at some point too. I even served as a volunteer advisor to a politician in Poland who was part of one of the EU treaty writing committees. They were writing one of the European treaties, and I thought I'll be in politics, and I had a lot of fun, and there were kind of a couple of highlights at the time, and I enjoyed it. But then I pivoted, and I realized I think I can make a bigger difference in business investing and helping people in other ways. Can you talk about that? You decided to go in a different direction at some point, although maybe initially, maybe because of your upbringing and my upbringing. Poland went through a lot of political change. Venezuela is going through a lot of change as we speak, hopefully in the direction that we all hope. That I felt like I should be a part of it. I remember opening a bottle of champagne with some friends in Paris on a bridge when Poland joined the EU. So in my lifetime, I went from Cold War Poland with borders being shut down and very different era to Poland joining the EU. Unthinkable. So change is possible. But tell me about that. You wanted to be in politics. You found another way to express yourself.
Yeah, well, I love that story, and it gives me a lot of hope, which is what we need at this moment.
Yes.
But so just to make sure I understand your question, you're kind of wondering like why I was interested in politics and why I ended up kind of not pursuing a career in that direction.
Yes, I'm curious.
Yeah. So, and this is another thing perhaps tied to my upbringing, but my father is someone who's fairly shy and quiet. He doesn't talk a lot, but there's certain things that he comes alive speaking about, and one of them is politics. So little me, who spent a lot of her life without her dad, maybe that had a role, because that was something that we always bonded over, like to this day, right? It's like to this day, we're sending each other, did you listen to this interview? Did you listen to that? What do you think about this? So yeah, I think it's worth bringing that up because it's curious, right? How like we have these like interests and where they come from. So I think my dad definitely played a big role there, and like our joint passion for politics and using that as a way to connect with him. Then I don't know if it was also just tied to the like being I'm someone that's like quite a caring person, and like being that responsible, like youngest of four, I always really felt the pain despite not being in Venezuela of what the country was going through. And yeah, I wanted to be part of like this movement that was happening, trying to overtake like our dictatorship and regime. So that really consumed me for a very long time. And I will say that I started X actually to write about politics and like mainly argue with people about politics. And it's so funny how much we change because I'm a completely different person now. But I used to spend so much of my energy arguing with people that were pro like Chavez at the time. And I used to spend my breaks at school going into forums and like arguing with them, debating. I started Model United Nations, which I loved. So I really thought that, like, this is my path. Like, I love debating, I love getting to the truth, like justice. But it really was like through studying it in more depth and just being exposed to more things and gaining a greater perspective, right? Where I saw, actually going into politics isn't the only path. So it was by studying in London, surrounding myself, in different environments, different contexts, that I was able to actually see past that kind of bubble that I was in and realize like there's different ways that you can impart change, and it's not just this one path that I was previously seeing. And yeah, that kind of gave me the freedom to then explore my other curiosities without the guilt of like, oh, well, you don't care. You don't care about your country because you're not going into politics anymore.
I like that. We do care, and there are many more ways to make a difference. And I think if everybody chips in, we can move mountains. And I've seen it happen, and I'm hoping to see that in Venezuela as we speak. Yeah. Speaking of change, I really love the concept that you talk about, which is playing big. You're a big believer in playing big. Tell me more what it means to you. How did it come about, and why it pays to play big in life and work?
Yes. So playing big is not only the name of my company, Play Big Careers, but it's also like this philosophy that I live by. Or try to live by as an imperfect human. But playing big is really about uncovering who you are and making space to break free from the cages that you don't even realize you're in because they're so ingrained in your day-to-day life. So it's really about living life on your own terms. And that for me is being intentional, challenging the default path, and also defining success on your own terms. And the idea came about because I've always been someone that has seen like the untapped potential in the people around me. And that coupled with kind of my perspective to see possibilities and opportunities where maybe others might not has now allowed me to like build a career around like partnering with professionals to help them expand their perspective and really follow their curiosity and like explore different career paths. And something else that I would say in terms of like how this came about and like why it's important is because a big frustration for me was seeing the people that I love the most, including myself, living on autopilot and like settling for less and really ignoring their intuition because of fear. So if anyone that's listening to this is like, oh, I'm trying to find my purpose or I don't know the next step to take, I would really encourage you to reflect on what frustrates you the most and then try to solve that for yourself. Because that's exactly what I did and what I'm doing.
I love the sound of it. What was the moment when you felt called that you should play bigger? Or was it always the case that you aimed very high?
Well, I would like to believe, this is a much more empowering belief, that, you know, clarity doesn't like strike, it unfolds. So it wasn't like one day I got this message coming in through my higher self, I'm not there yet, of telling me where to go down. But it was more that crossroads that I was in, that I was talking about before, right? Where I thought, okay, like, I don't feel aligned in what I'm doing. I'm having conversations with people who have this problem, which I have solved for myself. So I'm getting a lot of fulfillment out of it. Like, let's go. And really, it's giving yourself permission to bet on yourself and just try things, because I see life as like a huge experiment. And I always think, okay, what's the worst that could happen? So for me, it was like, okay, worst case scenario is I have to start looking for another job in a few months' time. I can live with that. Like, let's go.
Not a problem. When I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of a book that I read that I really liked. It's called 10x is Easier Than 2x by Ben Hardy. Do you know that book?
No, but I have to read it. No.
It rhymes with what you talk about. And when I was reading getting to know your work, his idea is that we aim for the 2x or the bonus or the raise. And actually the effort we put in, it's disproportionate to the payback. And if we aim for something much, much bigger that seems to be out of reach at the time, the actual incremental effort is not that much more than going for the smaller ask. And I thought that that's not what we're told, but that's, I think, the realization. And, for me, some of the moments when I was graduating, finishing school in Poland, and I wanted to go study in Paris, and people thought, you have a good degree in Poland, you could get a job right away. And I went to Paris where very few people would recognize my degree and get into a graduate school and kind of, start over. To me, it felt like it could open up so many more doors than just staying in Poland. And then going to New York would open so many more doors, right? So I was always intrigued by the other alternative option. And I never really spent too much time thinking, if it doesn't work out, well, you can always get a ticket back home, wherever home is, and start again. But I thought the bigger risk would be not to try, not to see if it could work. And here I want to ask you about career pivots. And you talk about binary thinking. How do you think about it? I feel like a lot of us are going through some pivots in different ways, either leaving larger companies. I started my own investment practice a few months ago, and I know what it's like, and it's a fascinating experience becoming independent. But talk to me about that binary thinking and career pivots, how that that happens? What happens there?
Yeah. And I've written about this, and I see this a lot, especially in the field that I'm in. So when you're kind of encountering any sort of pivot or you're facing some sort of change, right? And I think it's a tendency to see things in black or white. So right or wrong, like good or bad. And this thinking is like a cognitive trap. And I've experienced this myself when I was trying to leave my corporate consulting job and move into startups, because I didn't get into the details. But at first, when I set myself, this goal, I started facing this classic challenge, which was you need more startup experience. And I thought, okay, how do I get more experience if no one is willing to give me a chance? It was like the classic chicken and egg dilemma. But it was actually when I shifted my mindset from this path or that path to actually viewing it as like a spectrum of possibilities that I started to see more opportunities to reach my goal. So what this then allowed me to do was actually negotiate with the project that I was on at the time to work for 4 days a week. And I used the extra day to work in a startup that I mentioned previously, right, that I was building. And then within the 3 months, I got offered a full-time role in that fintech that we merged into eventually. So I think like anytime that you're only seeing two options, really stop and ask yourself, okay, if these two options weren't available, what else could I do? Because like there's always more doors. You just have to find different rooms.
I like that. It's a range of outcomes rather than success or not. And I like that.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, right? Like really challenging your perspective, and it's a very clear signal that you're kind of stuck in this cognitive trap of binary thinking if you're only seeing the two options, because it's always a spectrum. There's always other things that you're not seeing. So for me, how I eventually got into startups was by building the experience whilst working full time. That got me there, right? But if I would have just seen it as like getting the job or staying, then it would have removed this other possibility. And that's just one out of like many, many, many.
There are more options than you think. I want to ask you about courage. I brought it up briefly before we hit record, and I'm curious about the word itself. But you talk about clarity, that you propose to seek clarity instead of courage. And you say to break the cycle of uncertainty. I wrote it down for myself to think about. But talk to me about that. It's very uncertain when you go through those changes, all kinds of changes. And we need some clarity.
Yeah. So just based on what I just told you previously, like, I don't think it's one or the other, right? Like, I don't prescribe to that type of thinking. But what I meant was that, like, oftentimes people come up to me and they're like, oh my God, Cristina, you're so brave for like starting your own business. So we think that we need more courage, but it's actually not about choosing between courage or clarity, this or that. Like, you need them both, you need them all. But my view is that, like, pain pushes until a new vision pulls. So it's actually the fact that you don't have a clear, compelling vision that you emotionally connect with and that motivates you. That's what, in my belief, is what keeps you stuck in this overthinking, making you think that what you actually need is more courage. But actually, like, change and clarity comes when you're able to be honest with yourself about what it is that you want, right? Because when we're clear on that, then guess what? We can find the environments, the people, the resources to help us make that first step. And like, that's exactly what I did when I started my business. Like, I joined communities. I found people that were 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of me, right? And I created that like clear, compelling vision that I was really, really excited about. So for me, that's kind of like the blueprint that I followed and that I help people kind of navigate, because at the end of the day, right, your brain and your nervous system, they want to keep you safe. right? And that's typically in your comfort zone. So it's by understanding yourself, understanding your body to actually start challenging, going, well, wait a second, because just because I feel safe doesn't mean that there aren't risks in staying where I am right now, right? So yeah, for me, like I'm a big fan of like reframing and just seeing things in different ways, because that's often all someone needs to then choose a different response.
I like the sound of that. You know, you said courage, being brave. I've been told so many times, "Oh, you're so brave," and I would think, I don't really feel brave. I remember when I was moving to New York, I picked up a book, One Up on Wall Street, about Peter Lynch, with Peter Lynch's book, and I wanted to be in the investment field, and I got an internship in New York, and I was heading to New York. And one of the nights before, I don't think I shared this story with many people, but there was a movie about homeless people in New York. It was a beautiful movie, a story of a man that's trying to break out of his homeless life. And I was watching it with my grandma. And my grandma was terrified that I'm moving to that New York that we're watching on TV. And it was the New York of the 80s, like two decades earlier. So it was no longer the case. New York was in a much better shape when I was going to New York. But she said, you're so brave to go to that city, because people have ideas of how scary whatever the next step is, whether it's a city or a career or starting a firm, whatever it is. They think it's so scary, and you're so brave to do that. And I just knew I have to. And that movie had no impact on me, but it had a huge impact on my grandma, and she thought it's terrifying.
Yeah. And I think you just touched on a really important point, which is like how much and I slightly touched on it, but how much our environment plays a role, right, into what we see as like risky or courageous, and just that lens through which we see the world, right? Because if we surround ourselves with people that are a few steps ahead and that, have taken quote unquote more risks, then we wouldn't perceive the same move in the same way as we currently do, right? So like your environment really plays such a massive role, which is why I really encourage, and I just said I made sure to join communities where people were a few steps ahead of me and were also trying to do the same thing, because that gives me, right, the support and also the motivation to like see beyond my current perspective, which I think is important to keep reaching higher and higher and like playing bigger and bigger.
And I'm thinking the opposite of that. It's a huge untapped potential, right? I came across so many people that could have done so much more, but they have all those stories. And I never wanted to get caught on the wrong side of that story where I say, I wish I took that flight to New York. It was scary, but I still went. I wish I did this. I wish that I did that. I actually wanted to do it and see what happens. But I never really saw it as it's brave. It was almost like something that I had to do. I read this quote about F. Scott Fitzgerald, the writer, and he said to somebody in some interview that he had to write. It wasn't a choice. And I feel like if you find in your life something that you have to do, it's no longer a choice, then everything else becomes secondary. The doors open, opportunities appear, and you don't experience the fear that those that are looking at you doing things might experience, like my grandma did at the time. I don't know. You have some thoughts about it? Like if you have to do it, you'll find a way to do it.
Yeah. I definitely see where he's coming from. I also can appreciate like the nuance to that, because oftentimes like people oversimplify, like, oh, you should stop being so lazy and just take action. Like all you have to do is like take action. But a lot of the times there's so much more underneath that you need to dig deeper into to allow you to then make the space for you to tap into that power that you have innately and the courage to then like act accordingly. So if you try to like bypass the inner work, which I focus on in all my programs, then for me, it's a lot harder to create long-lasting change. Because guess what? We're creatures of habits. We have like a default mode that we're operating from, and that's based on our current programming. So you really have to be intentional about changing the program that you're running on right now. And it doesn't really it does start by, small changes that you do consistently, right? It's neuroplasticity. That's how we rewire our brain. But for me, it's also understanding what are those core beliefs that are actually driving the self-sabotaging patterns that are getting in the way of you being able to take that action.
I have some follow-up questions, but I want to ask you about the concept that you introduced that rhymes with what we're talking about. You talk about career expanders.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Yes. So I love the term expanders. I use it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully one day I can like trademark it. But it's what people like called me. So I thought, okay, there's something here. Like always pay attention to like the compliments, and the things that people tell you. So in the context of our careers, I see expanders as like fitting into 4 key criteria. So the first is they're the people that inspire you. Okay. So the signs to look out for here is when you are around someone who helps you to think bigger, motivates you, like you leave their presence having so many fresh ideas. So that's the first one. The second one is that they challenge you. So they really ask you thought-provoking questions and they share insights that help you kind of reframe your existing beliefs and assumptions. The third one is that they support you. So they're really like a strong, consistent support system in your life. And especially when, you're going through hard times or you're experiencing self-doubt. And then the fourth criteria is that they're vulnerable. So they actually are willing to share their challenges and feelings with you and create an environment where you feel safe to do the same. So that's like how I define expanders with those 4 criteria. And you really do have to tick those 4 boxes. And for me, it's like, okay, how do we attract them? I believe that you attract who you are. So it's not about like going out there and like finding these expanders, but actually like embodying the traits and the qualities that I've just walked, you through. And this is like how you will start attracting them into your life. And like, I'm literally living proof of this because the more I've leaned into this, especially this year, like the more expanders I've attracted into my life where I'm like, oh my God, like where were these people before? It's like, they're all there. You just have to, it starts with you. It really does.
It sounds like you have to be that kind of person to others, for others. And that gets
starting
mirrored
with yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it gets mirrored back to you. So people pick up on, and also maybe it's that moment when the teacher appears when the student is ready, when people can tell that Cristina is ready, and then they show up in your life in various ways. Do you think that's the kind of phenomenon?
Yeah, I definitely think there's an element to that. And I also think that there's the role of presence here, right? And when we're grounded and we're not stuck in our heads, then we're making space to be in the present moment where we can then see things a lot clearer. So things that were previously there, it's not that they weren't there, they were. I was just too stuck in my head to see them, right? So I think it's like actually cultivating a practice of being in the now that has also helped me to actually see more clearly like all these other opportunities around me.
I like the sound of it, and I'm curious about the practice that you have. I'll tell you a little story how the other day we were on a walk, my wife and I, and I was paying more attention to the smells of the trees and the flowers. And I don't know why in that moment it was just very overwhelming and I felt it more. And I told her, we took this walk before, but I smell things more right now. And maybe she said, oh, maybe because you're more present. And I thought, I think she's onto something, because there are moments when you're part of a conversation and somebody actually told you something very important. And you were listening, but you didn't hear it, right? Like you were not there. And I think if you can be more aware of what's going on around you, people might have some messages for you that they might not be even aware that they have a message for you, but you are there ready to hear it.
100%. I definitely think your wife, very wise, if I do say so, was onto something. And it's something that I don't have any kids yet, but it's something that children really teach you and like have taught me. Whenever I'm around my nephews and nieces, like my godson, the cutest, Kike, he'll literally walk by flowers and go, "Oh my God, flowers! They smell so nice." It like forces me to actually, oh, there are flowers here. They do smell nice. So kids just naturally do this. And honestly, when I'm around my nieces and nephews, like it really does force me to become so much more present and actually, yeah, just see things in such a different light. So I think kids have a lot to teach us.
I think we might need to tap back to that childhood. That's why I asked that question in the beginning, because I feel like a lot of people's stories and the reasons for their big why, that this didn't start yesterday. It could be a conversation you were having with your father that was passionate about politics or whatever it was, but you could find the thread, a little line running through your entire life that goes back, oh, my grandpa told me that, and that's why I'm intrigued by that, and that's why I'm on this path. So it's fascinating to see, and I think it's very empowering. I want to ask you about something related, the other side of career, and you write about it, which is the stress addiction. And I want to bring it up because I feel like we're living in an environment where we can get caught up with a lot of stress and tension, and maybe we're not aware of it as much. And it's a way of maybe ignoring something bigger. But you have some thoughts about stress addiction.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, stress addiction is real. And there's stress is like one of those concepts that is like so broad and there's like so many ways you can unpick it. But for me, it's like how I see it currently, it's like two aspects. One, it understanding how addicted we are as a society with like being busy, right? So if I ask my friends like, how are you doing? 9 times out of 10, their response will be, oh, I'm so busy, right? And it's like this constant busyness that keeps us in the state of chronic stress to the point where it becomes our default.
Yeah.
And the second aspect that's tied to this is like actually what's happening subconsciously. So I've really come to upskill myself in kind of the role of our nervous system, because I've like naturally it's become something that has really helped me navigate entrepreneurship and like reconnecting with myself. So like just to put this into like a more practical lens, if you think about a healthy nervous system and how it responds to stress, right? For me, it's like by staying curious instead of jumping to conclusions. So if you get an email that's asked like from your boss that's telling you, hey, Christina, can you do more work? Right? And you're already feeling overwhelmed. A regulated response would be to slow down, reconnect with your breath, feel your body sensations, what emotions are surfacing, right? So connecting with those emotions. And when you do this, you're able to keep the stress from getting worse because you're actually just making space for your body to be heard and for you to tell it like, hey, you're okay. We are not being chased by a predator, right? Which is the equivalent nowadays, like getting an email to like being chased by a predator before. So that's a response of a healthy nervous system. But what happens because we live in this state of chronic stress, an unhealthy, or I should say a dysregulated nervous system, which is out of balance, right, has a completely different response. So what you do is you get that email, you start to feel anxious, fearful, and instead of slowing down and actually being able to self-regulate and calm down, you start to think negatively. And those thoughts, right, then create more symptoms, physical symptoms in your body where you feel your heart begin to accelerate. You feel your chest like tightening. And then your mind, whose like primary job is to keep you safe, right? It starts catastrophizing and thinking about like the worst case scenarios, which then creates more anxiety and can typically lead to a panic attack. So it's actually until we start to implement practices where we listen and observe what our bodies are telling us, right? And reassuring them that we're okay, we're going to keep perceiving these threats and stay in this like constant state of stress. So yeah, no, go ahead.
No, there's so much that you said that I find fascinating. First of all, when you ask people how they are, they say they're busy. And I think it's like an easy way out. I think that's an easy way out. But also I had conversations on this podcast that it's a symbol it's a status symbol in a way that if I say I'm busy, it means I'm in demand. It means I have clients. It means I'm successful. It means that I don't have any idle time to do nonsense. Look, I'm busy. Okay. It's almost stop asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it became such a big part of the culture that we don't even ask, what are you busy with?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been in the business 20 years investing money for people, for families. And I've noticed that, you know, I had half of my career as an employee of an institution and of a firm, and the other half as semi-independent, now completely independent. But as an employee, you don't just serve the clients, you also serve your superiors and your colleagues and everybody else. So you kind of think that you have to look busy to impress people, to get the right promotion, to get the right bonus. I even remember those stories people would tell me that they're so proud that when they started, they were the first ones to turn the lights on the floor of the office and the last ones to turn them off. And I was the 20-something and I didn't dare to ask the question, what did you do in between? Right? Because there is a janitor that shows up and turns on the lights. There is the receptionist that turns on the lights. There is the CEO that turns on the lights. What did you do? Right? Like, we don't ask that. We don't even dare to ask one. Obviously, you know, were people, you know, 2 or 3 times my age at the time. I didn't dare to ask, but I was always curious. What are you trying to tell me? You know, so you were the one responsible for the lights. And, but they want to show that, listen, I was there before anybody and I left after anybody, and this should be enough to prove that I did something valuable. But to me, it's I have so many follow-up questions. What did you do? How did you use your time? And if anything, I realized that I think there's a peculiar challenge that if you're an employee and people hire you for a period of time, even if it's not a total hourly wage kind of setup, you're supposed to not leave before 5 or 6 or 8, whatever the job is. But if you find a way to speed up the process, which is something that I'm fascinated with, and I've experienced it in the second half of my career much more, that I have a huge incentive to do things in a more efficient way, especially the ones that are not the highest value added. So it frees up the hours to actually work with clients, look for investments, do the things where I think I add the most value. But if you're an employee and I can't leave before 7, if I find a way to save 2 hours that day, joke is on you.
Yeah.
You can't leave before 7 anyway, right? Like, I mean, you can, but somebody will bring up the story with the lights. You're not the last one turning the lights off. You have some thoughts about it? I feel like the moment you become independent in some way, or you're in an environment that's more intrapreneurial or entrepreneurial in some way, this counts, the fact that you can be more efficient instead of more busy.
Yeah. 100%, right? Work smarter, not harder. And I'm just jotting things down because I was like, ooh, I have so much to say about this. I think one element is just the culture, right? Like the role of culture here and like different geographies. Because, for example, I know in Latin America, like it is still very much that way. Like you go into the office at 9, like no one, God forbid, you're the first one to leave before 7. And like I've done internships there. So like this is very much like speaking from experience. So I think there's some countries that still, you know, are operating in these ways. And it's very hard to change something from that's like so embedded, right? Like in a culture, in a society. I would say that this is also very much tied to what like my philosophies, right? Which is like going off that default path and like being more intentional. So it's actually taking the time to stop and go, wait a second, like, why am I doing this way? Like, why do I think, start to questioning and ask yourself these questions, right? Like, why do I think that going into the office and turning on the lights is like this glorified thing? So I think it starts with curiosity, and to start challenging your beliefs, like, wait, why do I think this? Like, what is this doing for me? What is this actually helping me achieve, right? Because oftentimes you realize like you just adopt someone else's like definition of like success or career path, because we don't actually stop along the way. We're living in that autopilot. We have no idea what we actually want because we never stop to ask ourselves. So I think that's another big element to it. And it really, like a big part of this is starting to understand yourself, and not just what are your strengths, what are your superpowers, but actually in what context do you thrive? Because some people like love the corporate, they love the structure, they are completely content with 9 to 5, like great. A lot of people aren't. Like I was one of them. That was not for me. But we're all different. So again, it comes back to being curious and start that self-discovery to figure out like what lights you up, right? What energizes you. And you can, gain a lot of clarity when you go down that direction and actually allow yourself to try different things.
There's a lot of peace and safety in the 9 to 5 model, which I think is slowly going away or changing in some way. And I understand that for some people this means peace and safety, and they enjoy it, they like it. But if it's not for you, I think it's fair to ask some questions, and maybe you don't want to be the one turning the lights on and off. Maybe there's something more useful you could do with
100%.
your time.
And actually, this is like the topic of my newsletter this week, where the title is like comfort does not equate to safety.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what people overlook is, every path has its own set of risks. Mm-hmm. You're just not seeing them because it's familiar. It's your familiar path. But I think this idea of like job security, like it doesn't exist. Like it really doesn't. And it's important for you to really adopt a more proactive approach and figure out, okay, what are other ways that I can improve like my long-term position, right? And it doesn't mean that you need to start your own business, but it's, being a bit more strategic and starting to go beyond kind of that day-to-day autopilot mode and actually investing in skills and your long-term growth.
I'm thinking of investing and investments. You have investments that the price doesn't move a lot. It's very predictable. And suddenly people find out it was a fraud and the stock is worth zero, right? So on paper, for 99.9% of the time, it looked like there was no risk. And suddenly there's all the risk. And sort of a job with a secure paycheck could feel the same way. Because you're there for 25 years, 30 years, or some people, longer. And you showed up every day, Bob, Jeff, Mary, and everybody knows you. You had 1 million birthday cakes with them. And the firm is cutting 2,000 employees across the board and running a spreadsheet, and they have to reduce the headcount, right? And you end up on the wrong list. And after 25 years, tomorrow you don't have to show up. You're no longer needed. Your position was removed, canceled, deleted, whatever. And here you are. You acknowledge the whole risk on one single day. But the mortgage payments are there. The kids are still in college, whatever it is, right? So to me, the concept of risk, both in investments and in real life, are fascinating because I feel like we all have a hard time understanding what the actual risk is and what the downside could be. And I like the idea of, preparing some skills, knowing some people, having a network so that the next day you can call somebody, have a coffee with them, and find an opportunity sooner than if you assume that this is a place for life. And I almost feel like the stories of those jobs are almost imaginary, legendary. That people, but it's true. There are people that have lived. I worked for one company their entire career and never got caught and never got in trouble for any reason. But
Yeah.
I think the future is a bit different. I think we could embrace it and see it as realizing your full potential in many more ways than being in one place. But I know it sounds scary, just like my grandma watching that movie with me before going to New York. It is scary
Yeah.
at first, but it doesn't have to be.
And I think it's all relative, right? And this is where who you surround yourself with and the stories that you tell yourself play such a big role, because it's scary for someone whose family and friends only do 9 to 5 and they don't really see evidence for other alternatives. But it's not scary for someone whose parents were entrepreneurs and, they have that bias towards starting their own thing. So that's why I think context is really important. And I love, what you're saying around like just risk appetite in general, because I think there are different perceptions of risk and like what risk actually entails, which plays like a massive role here. And I agree that, it's already starting now. This idea that you start and have like this linear path in your career, like that's not the case. Like more and more people are having these like portfolio careers and really allowing themselves to question and to explore more and more. And yeah, I'm like fascinated to see what comes out of it. Yeah, I personally love partnering with people to start that process and like helping them get over this tendency to want to figure out which path is the right one. Because that's a lot of what I hear when people come to me. It's like, Cristina, I want you to help me figure out like what is the next path for you? What is the right one? And I'm like, okay, there's no right and wrong. Like everything, it really comes down to, how you're feeling in the moment, like that vision. It's taking responsibility. Like there's so many different elements, but really it's tapping into your intuition, taking a look at your current circumstance. Because again, like everyone's circumstances and needs are different. But I think, it's like this, it's a mental construct that there's something is right or wrong. For me, it's all about making a decision that you're excited about, energized by, and then making it right. Like that's all you can do.
And it's subject to change, right? What you thought you liked in your 20s can change in your 30s and can change in your 40s. And I see people having, second and third careers or doing two things at the same time as you were doing at some point. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. It's exactly. A range of outcomes. It doesn't have to be one decision that you make at 22 and for life you will just do that. I think that can change. I want to ask you about something that's close to my heart and thinking, and the inner scorecard. You talk about Buffett and Munger, and as you can tell, me coming from the investment world and being a big fan of both of them, I think having a well-defined inner scorecard, it's very important in life, both in knowing where you're going, but I think like a day-to-day happiness too. But I'm very curious how the playing big rhymes with having your inner scorecard.
Yeah. So when I came across this concept, and it was through Farnham Street, and I think I'm a big fan of Farnham Street blog. I think it really does a really good job in like providing insights into both of their philosophies. And the concept of inner scorecard like immediately clicked with me. And it's all about defining success based on your values rather than external opinions or like typical measures like wealth or status, right? And I think back to when you asked me about like what does play big mean to me, it is about living life on your own terms. So that's why they're very much correlated, right? Because that's what the inner scorecard is about. It's about getting clarity about what does this look like and what brings me joy, what brings me fulfillment, instead of looking outward. And I think Buffett in particular, right? Like the fact that he's living in, and everyone says this, but it's like so true, right? In the same house he bought decades ago, that just shows you like he's not lured by these external pressures. Like he truly is living into his values. And I think that's really, really important to actually feel meaningful and fulfilled in your life. Because it's not something external, it's actually internal, and the only person that can define it is you.
And it may take a little bit of time to develop that inner scorecard, because I think in the early years, we're trying to make other people happy, right? We do something to impress or appease our parents, then our peers are all getting this kind of a job, so I should get the same job. I definitely was also subject to that. At some point, all the kids I knew were getting an investment banking job, and I wanted to be on the investment management side, actually picking investments. And I went to interviews and I applied. I even got some offers to start an investment banking internship in Paris at some point, and it wasn't for me, and I knew it wasn't for me, but there was such a big peer pressure to even show that you can do it. So it took me a while to be more honest with myself that this is not something I want. This is something that other people think would be right for me. And I think it comes with a little bit of experience, and the sooner you can achieve it, I think the better choices you'll make. And I think day to day, I think you could be happier if you know you're doing it for yourself and it matters to you and not to somebody else. It's tricky. There's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. I do think a lot of the pressure is like self-imposed.
Mm-hmm.
But I completely agree with you. And I think that at the end of the day, we're all on our own separate journeys. That's why, as much as I would love to help someone, that I see as like being stuck, and I'm like, oh, if only they'd work with me, or like we could do this, like they would be, on a much in a much better like state in terms of like how they're feeling and their outlook on life. But you can't control that. You can't interfere with other people's paths. We can influence it, but we can't control it. So I think knowing the things that you can control and what you can't just gives you a lot of like peace. And just trusting, for me at least, like trusting that, and you don't have to be like spiritual. Well, you might have to be a bit spiritual to believe this, but like trusting that the universe or like life has your back, and like everything is unfolding as it should. Because when you truly believe that, then you can let go of like so much pressure of like trying to get things right, and just channel your energy towards the present moment and just showing up as, your highest self, like whatever self you want to be. And really that's all we have. And when we're stuck in our past or thinking about the future, it's just taking us away from the magic of creation, which only happens in the now.
It's not always an easy path, though. And you write about rejections, and you have a
Yes.
different way of looking at rejections. You say that they actually redirect us in a different direction for something greater, going back to playing big. But how do we handle rejections? I'm curious about your thoughts, but I'll tell you in a second how I think about it. But tell me more.
Yeah. So I've gone through my fair bits of rejections. And one of my most popular LinkedIn posts actually was one of me where I put a very, very vulnerable picture of me crying. And I actually asked a friend before I put it, I was like, is this screaming like attention seeker? Because that's not what I want. Again, story like attention is bad. But it was about me talking about how I missed like a promotion that I was like, thought I really deserved, and how I responded to that, which was like to do this whole campaign, and like within the next performance review cycle, like I got a raise. So everything, like again, it's all about like how you respond to things, because like setbacks, rejections are inevitable. So for me, it's like I'm such a big proponent of like empowerment and like taking radical responsibility over your life and your career, right? And like having these principles that help you gain a bit of perspective when you deal with challenging times. Because what tends to happen is that we can fall into this victim mindset, right? Where everything is happening to us. And the reason why I don't like to prescribe to that is because I feel like that leaves you feeling very disempowered. Whereas I really like to see things as happening for me to grow and evolve, right? And this doesn't mean that everything that happens to you, you deserve it. But again, it's kind of channeling our attention and our energy, which are two of our most important resources, to what we can control and actually extracting the lessons from that situation to help us move forward instead of like getting stuck in that loop, which is actually not helping us at all. So I think that's a big component for me, is like seeing it in that way. And another element as well is really building trust in yourself over seeking certainty. Because again, a lot of people think like, they need more confidence or clarity, but actually a key ingredient of playing bigger is building that self-trust and letting go of the need to have complete certainty over a certain path or outcome, right? And it's for like in my journey, the way that I've built self-trust is through years of like experimenting, allowing myself to like follow my curiosity and really just trusting my ability to figure things out as I went along. So that's how I kind of, those are the principles that I try to keep top of mind whenever I am dealing with like difficult times. And it does help me to, see things from a different angle and really bring more consciousness to it so that I can like choose a different response that does help me tap into my power rather than feeling powerless.
It's tricky because the more you do in life, the more quote unquote rejections you will experience, right? If you don't ask for anything, if you don't reach out, if you don't invite people on the podcast and they don't respond, right? You could take everything as a rejection. Mm-hmm. But when you really look at it, why would you think it's a rejection? Maybe they don't have time. Maybe they're busy. Well, the same word again. But there might be other reasons that have nothing to do with you, right? But we take it so personally, right? Somebody didn't answer my email, or somebody didn't invite me to the second interview. What did I do wrong? And there's so much more in that comes to play that taking it so personally is not very helpful. And the other part that you mentioned I really like is obsessing about one singular outcome. I really have to have this job under this boss at this firm and nothing else. And it might be the wrong time. And you brought up Buffett, but Buffett wanted to work for Ben Graham, and Ben Graham did not hire him the first time around. And he went back to Omaha and then came back and was finally hired by Graham for the few years that Graham was still active in investing. So even the biggest, celebrities, stars, legends that we admire, if you really pay attention, you realize they experienced something that you would, qualify as a rejection, and it didn't stop them on their path. They found another way, and maybe it took another year. And I definitely experienced moments like this where, just a different angle, a different attempt, a different try. And there's always a way. I think the word rejection is just such a powerful, it's like you feel like some jolt of energy that's pushing you away from this imaginary glass wall that you can't get through. It's like in the sci-fi movies, you touch it and it just shocks you and you get pushed away. It's not for you. It's not the case, there's always a different way.
For sure. Yeah, really seeing it as part and parcel of the journey. And part of your question, which I didn't mention, but as you were speaking and said something, it reminded me. But like seeing rejection as a redirection towards a more aligned path also gives me a lot of peace. And again, it's very aligned to my philosophy of just trusting that the universe has your back. And the story that I wrote about in this particular newsletter was how I got rejected from the final round in this startup role, where I literally thought I had it in the bag. Like the hiring manager took me under her wing. She was like mentoring me. She loved me. And I was like, okay, I got this. Spoke with the CEO. I was like, yes. Out of nowhere, they're like, nope, you don't have the role. And it actually, there's a whole story behind that, which you would never imagine. But the point is, if I didn't get that rejection, then I likely would have continued on the startup path and I wouldn't have started this business. Because it was at that point that I said, okay, you know what? Like, I don't want to keep investing into building other people's business. I'm going to bet on myself. So, and I've never felt more aligned with the work that I'm doing. So it's like, wow, that rejection really was a redirection towards a more aligned path. And like that happens in everything. Like if someone doesn't want to work with me, I'm like, thank you, universe, because they probably weren't the right client for me. Like I think it's just such a calmer, lighter way to go about life and really like flowing with it rather than trying to like push and force and like, I must, like, nope, I trust it, like, let it go, like, let's focus on the actions I can take, like, we move forward. So yeah.
I love that. And I had guests on the show talking about the power of letting go, both from the spiritual, tradition and business practice too. Sometimes it's worth letting go. And you brought up the clients. In my business, it's very important to me who the clients are. And they choose me, but I also choose them. And I think it's very important to take time to decide who is the right fit for each other. And it can save a lot of energy, time, even emotional drain. If it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. If that's the case, then let's move on. Stay friends and not work together. That's an option too. About that post, I'm going to include it in the notes. Can you share that link with me? I think the audience would enjoy reading that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other side of the coin, we're talking about rejections, that I want to ask you and loop back to confidence and the concept of compounding, which comes up a lot in my conversations. We talk about compounding wealth, capital, skills, kindness even. But you talk about compounding confidence, which I kind of know where you're going with it, but tell me more. How do you think about compounding confidence?
Yes. So that concept came about because, again, a lot of my clients are coming to me, struggling with confidence and wanting more of it. So they're like feeling burnt out, or they're going through a particular difficult time at work that's really like knocked their confidence, or they're wanting to like start a side hustle or like pivot in their career, but they're really struggling to take the next step. So my view is that like confidence is a skill and you develop it, right? Not when you're feeling ready, but precisely when you're feeling uncertain. So speaking of coins, I see confidence and self-worth as two sides of the same coin. Okay? Where confidence is like the top of the iceberg, right? It's what people see. And the way you build it is by pushing yourself to do things outside your comfort zone despite feeling uncertain. Okay? Then you have the other side of the coin, which is self-worth. And that's what's underneath the iceberg. Okay? It's how you perceive yourself. And how you build this is by actually creating and keeping promises to yourself. And also, and this is like the most important and game-changing one for me, it's starting to really internalize the belief that you are inherently worthy, regardless of any external achievements. Like the sole fact that you are born, like makes you worthy, right? And I focus on both because typically what I've observed is like we tend to overlook one, right? And it's actually like the action is where confidence becomes visible. And small, steady steps creates momentum. And momentum is what builds confidence. And this is like where the idea of compounding confidence comes from.
It almost feels like if you have a big task in front of you, like launching a podcast for the first time ever, like I did 2 years ago, you have to break it up into smaller pieces and realize, oh, I can figure this out. I can figure that out. And you gain the momentum that you can see how all the pieces can come together and work. And whatever project you have on in front of you, it helps me to see it as, I'll show to myself that it's doable in smaller increments. And people ask me, I think this episode will be past the 100th mark when it comes out. And people ask me, it's a big number that I feel overwhelmed to think it's been that many. But you show up for everyone, for every conversation, you schedule it, you prepare, you read, and you get excited about having somebody on the show. And it's one episode at a time. But if you told me, Bogomil, can you produce 100 episodes? I would say, Cristina, we have to talk about it. Right? So in small increments, the confidence and the competence, right, also grows, whether it's, stock picking, investing, or career, or running a podcast. But I like this idea of compounding. That's incremental improvement that builds on the previous day.
Yeah. And first, congrats, because that's a massive milestone.
Thank you.
And from someone that started a podcast 5 years ago, I think.
You were early.
I know. If only. I swear, I've been early in so many things, but those limiting beliefs, they really got me good back then. I only ended up recording, I think, 5 or 6 episodes. And to this day, I still have friends who are like, when are you doing the podcast? I'm like, it's been 5 years, people. It's not happening right now. But yeah, it's definitely breaking things down. I agree. But from my experience and tying back to an earlier point that I made, what really, I would say, a key factor in me not kind of continuing down that route, one, there's a lot of work to it. And with a full-time job and everything else, I just really struggled. And it was probably linked to not having a very clear why and a vision. So I got to a point where I was like, why am I doing this? Apart from love having conversations with people, meeting new people, but I didn't create this clear vision for myself. And for me, I really lacked that, the drive to show up day after day. So yeah, I really commend you, because 100 episodes is a huge accomplishment.
So many fun conversations, and I feel like I learned a lot. I got to know people that I already knew even better. I got to meet new people, or find an excuse to spend some time with them and get to know their work. So it's been so much fun. And then the audience is wonderful, sending me messages and emails. And even the other night, I was reading a long email from somebody who says that my podcast changed their life. And it's very touching, because I've become part of their life, and my guests become part of their life because they spent an hour or so with us every week. When you really think about it, even if you're good friends, you might not have that much time every week on a regular basis. So I'm very grateful for it. I want to ask you about trust. And you talk about trust as the lock and vulnerability as the key. Trust is an important concept in the world, and also in my profession. Munger, that we brought up, talked about trust as this invisible web that makes things happen in business. And in the early days, Buffett and Munger would sign agreements on one single page, and now it's 50 pages with lawyers and disclaimers and footprints and footnotes and anything you can imagine. But I think trust is such a powerful thing, and it takes time to build it, earn it. I think earn it, deserve it, and you can lose it in a heartbeat, whether it's a relationship or a business contract, business situation, anything. It is at the end a relationship between people when you really think about it. Can I trust you in some way? So talk to me about the concept of trust, how you see it.
Yeah. So I would say that Brené Brown definitely influenced my current perspective of trust. And she borrows this definition from Charles Feltman, who is a leadership and well-being coach. And the quote goes, trust is choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. And when you view trust in this way, then if you're not willing to open up, right, then you can't build genuine trust. So this is where like the lock and the key metaphor come into it, because you can't have one without the other, right? And like you said, like I completely agree. For me, building trust has to be earned. It's not something that's done overnight. And it's definitely not in like the grand gestures, right? It's actually like the accumulation of small actions we take every day. And I think especially as leaders who have to like lead by example, it's really, really important to do consistently. And what helped me understand this very ambiguous and like broad concept that is trust better is Brene Brown has like this really great framework. Like I do love a good framework. And it's called Braving Trust, right? And essentially it has 7 elements of trust, and it helps you identify the areas where you can strengthen trust in your existing relationships. So you can use that, at work, you can use it in your personal life. And the 7 elements are boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. So even just hearing those words, you can have an idea, right, of like the what building trust and actually the different ways that you can like strengthen it, because it's not just keeping a prompt, like it's not integrity, just about integrity, which is like saying what you like, doing what you said you would do, right? But it's about, do you set boundaries, and like do you actually respect them for yourself? Because if you can't respect them, how do you expect others to, right? So there's like so many different things. If anyone wants to like dive deeper, if you just Google like Braving Trust framework, Brene Brown has a lot of resources that can help you like implement it and just start to see and like do a mini assessment, which is what I included in like my newsletter. Of like, where do I stand, right? Where am I doing well? Where am I not? And yeah, that really helped me conceptually, because otherwise like trust is thrown around so much. And I think having clarity over how you see it is really important if that's something that you want to prioritize in your life.
There's a story that comes to mind when I'm listening to you, especially when you talk about vulnerability as the key. When I wrote my book, Money Life Family, I showed a manuscript to a respected investor who I really like, and I met him in his office. He closed the door to the conference room. I don't think I shared this story before. If I have, not many times. And he says, he put down the manuscript, and he says, Bogumil, it's a very intimate book. And I said, yes, it is. Because it was a book about investing, but also about my personal story, why I care about the kind of investing that I do. I manage money for families. And I said, money is a very intimate topic. And if my audience, my clients cannot know my journey, how can I serve them in their journey? So I do have to be vulnerable in that moment, so they get to know me and why I care for them to feel comfortable with me and trust me. That's why when you said that trust is the lock and vulnerability is the key, I completely agree, because you can't earn trust without being a bit vulnerable, so people actually get to know you. It's like going to a doctor and not knowing, they don't know who you are, they don't know your name, they don't know anything about you, you don't know anything about them. You can't build trust. You have to start dropping those walls and allow them to see you. Yes, it's scary, it's it makes you vulnerable, but how else would you ever earn their trust? And I think that's where the magic happens, but it's a hard thing to deliver. And he pointed it out, and I told him I couldn't see any other way of writing that book. It had to be a very personal book, and I'm glad it's out there, and people are reading it and writing beautiful emails about how it resonated with them, and they share their stories. But before people share their stories with you, you have to share your story.
Yeah. Lead by example, right? Yeah, I fully subscribe to that. And I need to add your book to the second book recommendation that you've made today.
You're keeping a list. I'll
Yeah.
I'll
Yes.
send you a copy. I'll send you a copy. I
Yeah.
have one or two questions before I let you fly away. I do want to ask you
Okay.
about asking better questions. And I always cared about the quality of questions, but I think this podcasting journey has even sharpened that focus for me. Like what kind of questions we ask, because the best answer we can get will happen only if we ask a good question. And you have some advice on that topic. And I think your work is a lot about asking questions so that people can reveal the answers that they might already have in them. That's how I thought about it. But tell me about the art of asking better questions.
Yeah. And I actually have a funny story here. Or at least I think it's funny. So my mom always told me that I was an extra curious, because I think all kids are very curious. She said I was an extra curious kid and person in general, because I always seemed to ask her questions that she didn't have the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
So from what I can remember, like since the age of 4, a very like pure and like innocent child, I was always very perceptive and wanted to understand like why people were and behaved the way they did. And sometimes this put my mom in a bit of a difficult situation. So I remember one time, and I don't actually remember it. She was the one who relayed the story to me. We were in a lift. So we were in an elevator. And I go, "Hey, mom, why does that lady have darker skin than me?" And luckily, like the lady laughed. But there was many situations like this where my mom was like, every time we'd go out, and if you open your mouth and the words, "Hey, mom, why?" came out, I was like terrified of what you would say. And a lot of her friends like try to intervene and go like, "No, you need to tell Cristina, like she can't like ask these questions." My mom's like, what can I tell a 4-year-old? Like, what am I going to tell her? She's so innocent. Like, she's not doing it from a bad place. It just comes out of genuine like curiosity. So I've always been very much into asking the questions, and I think asking good questions is one of like the best ways that we can connect with other people. And I don't actually think that it's that hard, but we love to overcomplicate things. Okay? So if you ask me like the art of asking better questions and like what my formula would be, I think in particular, there's 3 things. So one, it's being present and not stuck in your head, right? So listening with the goal to understand rather than think about what you're going to say next, like what you're going to reply. Because it's when you're present that you can actually pick up on like little subtleties, right? And like dig deeper into conversations. But if you're so focused on something that you're supposed to ask, then you miss that opportunity to actually deepen the connection. So I think that's the first one. The second one is really leading with curiosity and compassion. And to say this like very, very succinctly, when you care about the answer, your questions naturally become more thoughtful and engaging. Like, that's it. Like, really, for me, it's like as black and white as that. And the third one is context matters. So it depends who you're speaking to, right? Where, like for what, because this all helps you frame questions in a way that will resonate, right, with the other person, and also for you to kind of extract meaningful insights. So again, that could sound like a bit abstract. And I love like making things more tangible. So something that I do and that I tell my clients is like the importance of asking what I call high signal questions, right? When they're networking or when they're interviewing for jobs. And these are the types of questions that show that you've done your research, okay? And they help you uncover gaps or opportunities in the company that relate to the role that you're interested in. So by you asking these questions, you're actually gaining insights into where you can contribute and add value to the company. And again, I'm going to give another very practical example here. So say you're in an interview, right? And I ask you, hey, Bogomil, what lead generation strategies are delivering the best results for the company at the moment? I could ask you that question. Or I could ask you, hey, so I've had a look at your social media channels and TikTok in particular, and I noticed that you are running campaigns with micro influencers that are having around a 15% engagement rate. I'd love to understand like what made you focus on influencers as part of your marketing strategy, and how do you go about prioritizing different campaigns? You're trying to get to the same like answers, right? But
Right.
which question positions you in a better way?
No, I can see, and I really like the idea that you care about the answer, right? I think that's something that gets lost when we ask questions. And how you frame the second question was just like softer, somehow felt less, right? More inviting, that I can answer it in many different ways. I don't feel as much put on the spot here when you ask me, what's your metric and what's this? And I like the part that, doing a little bit of research ahead. I've received over the years so many inquiries about job opportunities at different firms where I was, and I would think that somebody didn't even open the website to look at what the firm is about. And it doesn't take a lot of effort, but I feel like a little bit of preparation, being actually curious. And I love what you said, which is you actually have to care about the answer, and you can't fake it. People will pick up on it. If you don't care about the answer, don't ask the question. Ask a different question. Ask a question that you really want to hear about. You want to hear about their childhood? Ask them about their childhood. And I had Dan Sullen on the show. The episode will be out by the time this one is out. And we talked about asking questions. He wrote a book called Ask. And one thing that I'll mention from the book, oh my God, I'm giving you another book recommendation.
No, I'm like, ask. You're like me. I do the same in all the conversations. People go away and they're like, Cristina, I have resources to like now go and explore.
But he brings up the idea of a follow-up question, which is something that's not used enough. But somebody just opened their heart to you. They just told you a story. And if you actually listened, there is a beautiful follow-up question hiding right in front of you somewhere in what they told you. Ask about the debt one more time. Ask about something. Like it just pops up. And just being aware that people are waiting for the follow-up, because the follow-up, it's an acknowledgement that you heard me. You noticed what I said. You remember what I said. And you want to hear a little bit more about the elevator and the lady and how she laughed and what she asked when you asked how she reacted. Like the fact that I remember, like there's something in us that we notice that somebody's really part of this conversation. But the art of a follow-up question, I think it's very helpful.
Gosh, like, yes, I love that you mentioned this. And it's so important. And it reminds me of a story when I was interviewing last year, and I got really great feedback from who would have been my boss. He's like, "Wow, Cristina, like you've asked like some incredible questions." And these questions, the questions that he was referring to weren't questions that I had prepared, right? So it's all great to prepare these high signal questions. But again, what I actually communicate also to my clients is being present enough and actually listening so that you're able to identify exactly these opportunities where you can then go, oh, it's interesting that you mentioned this. Can you tell me a bit more? Because I currently, like, these are the questions in my experience that really impress the interviewer, because they show that you're really present, right? And that you're curious. And at the end of the day, like you said, we all just want to be seen and heard. So yeah, I think that if we're talking about the art of questions, follow-up questions definitely play such a building that trust and forming that connection.
I do want to ask you about your definition of success, but I'll mention just one thing. I think in conversations, what I've learned in the book Ask and Dan Sullen, the guest on the podcast also introduced me to this idea, is that we think we have to be an expert to be an interesting person in a conversation. But the truth is that the less we actually know about the topic, he proposes the idea that we don't compete with the person talking, right? Like if I was doing exactly what you do, I would be trying to, I don't know if I would, but a lot of people would like to one up what you just said. But if you're building rockets on weekends and sending them to the moon, I know nothing about it. But Cristina, I want to hear all about it. How do you build them? What kind of materials? Where do you buy? What kind of fuel? How high do they fly? How fast do they fly, right? I know nothing about building a rocket, but I want to learn everything about it, right? So when you really think about it and you feel like, I'm not prepared for this conversation, actually, the less you know about it, the better questions you'll have, because you'll come in with this childlike 4-year-old enthusiasm. Mom, tell me how this works, right? And a lot of people appreciate having somebody like that in the room because they'll get to share what they are doing with somebody that wants to really learn. I find that perspective very helpful. Tell me about your definition of success.
Yeah.
How do you think about it?
Wow. So my current definition of success,
Let's hear it.
because it does evolve. I don't want to say every day, but on this journey towards uncovering who I really am, sometimes there will be dramatic differences in what I perceive success to be. But I think right now it's really having a clear mind, an open heart, and living in a way that's aligned with my highest values. So what that means for me and what that requires is that I have a very calm inner state, and I actually make it my priority to be my favorite person first and foremost, before anyone else. So that's something that I've really been kind of reflecting on, and it really epitomizes my journey this year, which has been a lot of heart opening and really trying my best to live more and more into my values. And there's also this other concept that I was reminded of the other day, which I really like to consider, and this might resonate more with other people. But it's this idea of identifying the infinite games, right? So the things that we never want to quit, and then designing your life around it so that we can play them forever. So these are the things that, bring you joy, make you feel fulfilled, and give you the sense of purpose, no matter what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So again, it's having to ask yourselves oh, what are these things? Because when do we ever really take the time to think about, oh, what are some of these infinite games, right? That no matter what, I would want to be doing them. And for me, some of these are daily exercise, meditation, eating nourishing whole foods, which helps me focus on kind of my mind, body, and soul, and trying to reach kind of peak condition in all three of these areas. I think another one is being my own boss, which gives me the liberty to work when and from where I want. And as someone that has itchy feet and loves traveling, that's very, very important for me. And I mean, there are a few because I have done this exercise, but yeah, I think reading, writing, and just surrounding myself with expanders, as I said, these are all practices that energize me and also help me see myself more clearly.
I think it's beautifully put, and I like how you framed it. You like to frame things, and I think it's a beautiful framework to pursue. I wonder why it took us so long to bring up infinite games, because I talk about infinite games on this show a lot. And are you a fan of James Carr's? You've read the book, Infinite Games, Finite Games?
No, I haven't, but I heard of the concept actually through Simon Sinek. Obviously his book, and he does kind of reference that this is where the original concept comes into it.
So, a couple of things. One is James Cars wrote this book that's not very long, Infinite Games, Finite Games, but he gave one of his last interviews with a friend of mine, Sean Delaney, that I highly recommend. And it's a podcast interview with James Cars when he was an older gentleman a few years before he passed away. And he tells the story how the book was written. I'm not going to give too much away. I highly recommend the episode to you and the audience. But it's a beautiful book because it introduces the kind of two worlds to us, that we are made to believe that all the games are finite. There's a winner and a loser. And there are some games that we play that we don't realize that they're in their nature infinite, like friendship. There's no winning or losing in friendship. You want the friendship to continue, or marriage, or a business partnership, or whatever it is, that, or pursuit of knowledge. When you realize there are more infinite games in our life that we care to keep going. Investing is an infinite game. You don't want to lose everything at any point. You would like it to compound and compound and compound and pass it on to the next generation. That's the world I operate in with my clients. But then you realize that the joy, so the goal of an infinite game is the joy of playing. And James Cars in this interview, and you hear the whole story in his own voice. So reading the book is one thing, but actually hearing his voice and the way he tells it, how he was a professional athlete and so on. And he realized that a lot of the games are about the score and who won. But he said, I like playing. And as kids, you were talking about your 4-year-old self. You liked playing. Like it was a play, asking questions and discovering the world. You were not trying to win anything. You were not trying to offend anybody. And you were just playing. And I think so many things, if you could see it as a play and being in a state of awe, like I'm so fascinated how beautiful the flowers are, like your nephew, and how they smell. It's a very liberating and inspiring way to look at the world as an infinite game instead of a finite game that we have to win or could lose. It's not the case. And it goes back to what you said earlier. It's not binary, good or bad. It's a range. It's a better friendship, an even better friendship, an even greater friendship. How about that?
Exactly. And yeah, thank you for diving more into that concept. I have now a podcast episode that I will watch. But completely, right? It's not about whether you have a good relationship or a bad relationship, a good job or a bad job, right? Everything is a spectrum. So it's like, how do I move myself and align myself more towards the things that I care about? And slowly, with every decision that we make, right, we can uncover more about ourselves, what we care about, and just live a life that feels more aligned with who we want to be.
Cristina, this was so much fun. I'm really grateful we made it happen, and I appreciate your time and your wisdom. I'll include everything in the links, and I'm sending you some book recommendations after that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Loved our conversation. Hopefully the first of many.
First of many. You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski.